Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this Lifelink Workwell webinar, Neurodiversity in Tech, Designing for Performance, Innovation, and Retention. Firstly, thanks to the panelists for joining us today, taking some time out of your lunch to talk to us, share your experiences on neurodiversity. I can see that all our panelists have joined us, so we'll just go through some introductions for them while we wait for members of our audience to continue to join. We have Jackie Taylor, the Chief Executive of Lifelink Workwell, Nick Price, who is the founder of tech recruiting specialist Bright Purple. He's also a long-standing board member of Lifelink. And Ross Wilson, the Chief Executive Officer at Vita Tech, a digital transformation agency with over 15 years experience in the space. Just a little bit of housekeeping for our audience. We are in listen-only mode. So if you have any questions, thoughts, things you want to share with us, just use the text box. We'll pick these up towards the end. Now, I'm going to hand over to the members of our panel just for a short introduction from each of them. If you take maybe just a minute or less, introduce yourself, give us a little bit of background, talk about your current role, any particular experiences in tech, neurodiversity. So, Jackie, if we could start with you, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ryan. Good afternoon, everyone. Absolutely delighted to be here. So I am the Chief Exec here at Lifelink. I've been here just over 12 years now, and over the last couple of years had a real focus on developing our Lifelink Workwell side of things, which is all around supporting employers to create healthy, happier workplaces. And neurodiversity is a huge part of that. So a big part of my role is helping organisations to think about how their work environments, leadership, and ways of working can better support their teams. And today's call is focusing specifically on those kind of neurodivergent employees.
Thanks, Jackie. Nick, you're up next.
Hi, I'm Nick Price. I'm the founder and CEO of Bright Purple Tech Recruiters, based in Edinburgh, 31 years now at the helm of that business, but also 6 years with Lifelink as a non-exec, and obviously a lot of exposure to the whole challenges around mental health and neurodiversity through my experiences with Lifelink.
And Ross, if you want to just introduce yourself quickly.
Sure, happy to, Ryan. Ross, Chief Exec here at VidaTech. We're really a bespoke software development agency building mobile apps, web platforms, and delivering AI work for customers. A lot of our focus is on both kind of employee experience and health and well-being. So we're probably most famous for building Couch to 5K as an app, which engages a lot of people across the country. So kind of designing for inclusive essentially is kind of in our DNA. And then previously to being at VidaTech, I worked for the Insights Group for 17 years. So I used to work in a lot of DEI programs for large enterprise organizations globally. And thankfully at that time we were starting to break through just the kind of superficial layer of DEI and going into the multi-layers that are there. So hopefully can bring some of that experience today.
Thanks, everyone. So now we'll just move on to our first topic. There's a number of topics we're going to look to cover off. We'll just see how the conversation flows, see where we go naturally. I'll try and jump in and keep us on track if there's anything that's key. I think that's in danger of being missed. So for our first topic, we're going to say, neurodiversity in tech. What do we actually mean? How does neurodiversity present in the workplace? More specifically in tech workplaces. Nick, do you want to lead us off on this?
Yeah, sure. Well, we've been talking obviously inside about the Tech Talent Charter on diversity and inclusion, and it was saying that 53% of people report having the neurodivergent condition, but without formal diagnosis. So it's prevalent, but it's not always recognised and supported. But tech is, in my opinion anyway, it's a natural home for people who think differently. Neurodivergent people are obviously bringing unique strengths, and depending on what the condition can be, from everything from there's many obviously ADHD, dyslexia, sensory overload, etc. But pattern recognition, creativity, attention to detail. There's a wide array of skills that neurodivergent people thrive inside a tech environment, from what we've seen in our experience.
Jackie, Ross, do you have any thoughts on this? What are we saying when we mean neurodiversity in tech?
Yeah, I think I guess one thing I would add to that is and it's building on what Nick says, there are some real strengths to our neurodivergent employees, but I think it's really important to remember that neurodiversity isn't just about those particular skills. It's actually about recognizing that people process information, communicate, and approach problems in a very different way. And there's a real opportunity here for organizations to create those environments where different approaches can really contribute to innovation and allow those individuals to be at their best and shine in the workplace.
Yeah, 100% agree with that, Jackie, and what you've said, Nick, as well. I think one of the challenges and one of the kind of assumptions we need to challenge within organizations is a kind of that it's a problem or that it's a bucket that you kind of put people in, rather than seeing that neurodiversity, covers a huge range of kind of conditions officially from a medical perspective. But from my side, we're all different. We all think differently. We come into the workplace. We've all got slightly different needs, and it's about how do we create an environment that supports that, rather than trying to solve a problem as such, which is maybe the way it's been seen in the past.
And what about the kind of misconceptions around neurodiversity? What misconceptions do you guys see shaping workplace decisions? These kind of assumptions, how might they be affecting things like employee performance or retention? Ross, do you wanna comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a there's a few things we see. First of all, somebody might look at a person maybe not being quite as responsive or not as verbal in their communication and think they're not that interested, and kind of make that kind of jump to that assumption. So trying to educate people in terms of what are the communication preferences and different needs that people have got along the way. I mean, I was brought up, with the kind of mantra of treat people the way you want to be treated.
Yeah.
And then when I went to Insights, it was a case of realizing, though, you need to treat people the way they want to be treated and have that kind of understanding. So I think there's that part. And then I think you get into a kind of a bad good use and a bad use of stuff where people say, oh, put them on this because they're really good at this, or thinking they're neurodivergent. That's kind of an assumption that's made quite often. They're the technical expert or whatever, and maybe underplay some of the strengths that they can do from like an innovation perspective or whatever. So there's that kind of, it's trying to be positive, but it's actually a bad implication from it. And as I said, there's a part on the bad side where people maybe just think they're switched off and aren't as engaged if they're not behaving in the same way, and just see different as an issue essentially.
Can I just jump into that? Actually, I think one of the misconceptions for me and some of the conversations I have with employers is that, someone who's neurodivergent requires complex or highly specialist adjustments. And actually, in reality, that's not the case at all. Sometimes it can be really simple things like clear communication, structured meetings, agendas in advance, time to prepare. And I think, building on what you said, Ross, it shouldn't be seen as an extra. Actually, we need to look at how we create environments that get the best out of everyone while taking some of the more nuances into account.
And I think also that when you say misconceptions, I wonder how many we talk about how many people are neurodiverse, but I wonder how many non-disclosures there are out there, and I wonder how many people are inside organizations that have a neurodiverse trait of some kind, but they may be terrified to actually even talk about it because you talk about misconceptions, but I wonder how many organizations actually allow people to feel safe inside their organization to be open and say, listen, I've got this condition or I've got that condition. So I think sometimes people who have a condition also have a fear of coming forward. And obviously Ross talked about his organization are very supportive, but I wonder how many organizations struggle to be supportive.
Yeah. And I think, sorry, Ryan, again, if I could just jump in.
No, please, just
I think when someone's in an organisation, then we can put all of the support in place that they need. But actually, how do we reduce some of the barriers right at the start of the recruitment process, right from the application form to the interview? How do we reduce some of those barriers so that we are getting the best talent coming through and actually getting them in front of us? Because for a lot of people, they don't have a formal diagnosis, but but they're also perhaps afraid of raising an issue for fear of being kind of discriminated against, unintentionally, of course. But so I think it goes right back to the start of that kind of recruitment journey. What can we do at that point, right through the journey for them?
I think from our side, we try and do things through the process to bring out different skills along the way. So there's the technical tests and there's engagement you expect about having to solve a challenge, etc. But one of the things we try to do is be very clear because we're a digital agency delivering for clients, and it needs to be an agile environment, and that's not right for everyone. And I think it's okay to understand that. So sometimes people who lead with more neurodiversity can struggle with content switching. And that piece of, they maybe need to work on a longer project, as you said earlier, Jackie, clear communications, a clear schedule of meetings, etc., blah, blah. So we're very upfront with people in terms of what the operating environment's like. So I'm not saying it's for everybody and it's a utopia. We're certainly very much on a journey to try and be more inclusive as an organisation, but we try and be clear from the outset. And I think we've definitely had one or two people join us along the way who thought that environment would be good for them, but it wasn't. And so how do you be supportive around that? It's not about the exit plan, but how do you support the person with the right career choices as
Yeah,
well along the way?
yeah, absolutely.
I think that quote you mentioned earlier, Nick, 53% of people who identify as neurodivergent in the tech sector. I wonder what the actual percentage of that that's diagnosed is. Obviously, that's 53% self-identifying. I imagine the number who are formally clinically diagnosed might be very small because we know there's a lot of difficulties around that. There's a lot of obstacles that face people who
Yeah,
want
and I
to
think
get that.
and I think also, like anything, the world is learning, isn't it? We learn about, if you look at medicine and all the things that we learn every single day. We keep learning about different things, and I work with people who themselves have said, yeah, I think I'm neurodiverse. So I've got a very senior colleague who tells me that he's neurodiverse. To be honest, he's just a good guy. I've never ever thought about it. I've never ever I've never ever felt that I needed to do anything for him. We're just colleagues, and we find a way. But I think that there are, inside huge organizations, I would imagine it's much more than 53% because they're finding out every single day, something else is some other condition, sorry, is being put into the pot. So I would imagine 53% is probably a low number.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we are here learning.
Yes, we are.
We are learning. And one of the things that we were thinking about, and one of the things we want to kind of try and cover was, what does it look like? A lot of people joining us on the call will be thinking, how do I design a workplace environment? What are the kind of processes I can put in place to suit neurodiverse employees? So what are things that we can change, or what are the kind of supports that we can put in place? Jackie, maybe you're your best place to speak about,
Yeah.
neurodiversity support or workplace design, that kind of area.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Thanks, Ryan. So I think the key shift is looking at how do we move away from trying to accommodate individuals after the effect. So once we know someone is neurodiverse, and shift that thinking and mindset into actually how do we design our workspaces from with different thinking and from a different perspective. Because when we do that, inclusion stops being about adjustments for just a few people and actually it becomes about creating those systems and ways of working that allow different kinds of thinkers to contribute and be their best in the workplace. And actually, in practice, that often starts with some of those everyday processes we take for granted. And I've touched on a couple of those already. So, for example, how we structure meetings in collaboration. Our agendas shared in advance so that people have time to prepare and process information. As a planner, I love a bit of time to prepare and process. Are we expecting people to contribute immediately, or are there opportunities beyond the meeting for them to share something perhaps in writing afterwards, or, in this new world of tech and video we're living in, do a quick video and share an update with us? And some of that might just help people who are a bit uncomfortable just sharing stuff on the spot. Clarity is also key. Um, I try to practice with my team, certainly, to be really clear on expectations, priorities, outcomes, exactly what I'm looking for, to demystify the task, for want of a better phrase. And for our neurodivergent colleagues, that's actually really key, to allow them to focus on the task in hand and the work itself. And in terms of the work environment, some people do their best work in quieter spaces with few interruptions. I would say I'm neurotypical, but when I'm working on a tender, I need peace and quiet to do that. While others like a bit of noise in the background or a radio on, or, they like to just know there's a bit of white noise perhaps in the background. And I think from organisations I've spoken to, you know, we're starting to realise that productivity doesn't always come from everyone working in the same way. And through some of the work we do here at Lifelink Workwell, we see organisations putting in clearer structures, flexible ways of working, and having psychologically safe environments for everyone. And all of that for all employees actually helps to improve our well-being, engagement, and productivity across the entire workforce. But some of those changes can be really small, and some of those are the most powerful or most impactful. So I'll give you a very quick example. So I've recently heard about a workplace. It was an event I was at last year, where they have some neurodivergent colleagues who really struggled with video presentation or standing up using PowerPoint in front of an audience. So actually, they allowed them to pre-record the presentation and have their, voiceover all recorded, their little video face at the bottom right-hand side of the screen or whatever. And that allowed them to play that to the audience in, kind of real time. But the individual was still in the room, able to answer any questions and actually engage in the conversation. But what that did was it took away the stress of remembering, what have I got to say? When have I got to say it? Am I talking too fast? Am I talking too slow? And it actually made that experience for them and that reasonable adjustment, so much easier, and less stressful. So thinking about, and I'll wrap this up, I promise, thinking about how we reduce some of that sensory overload. Think about the lighting in the building. It's not always the best. Think about quiet spaces, the acoustic design. Baffle boards are quite good for that kind of thing. And actually, how do we improve the concentration and comfort for those who are sensitive to noise or visual stimulation? Having little fidget toys or fidget pens or whatever in meeting rooms is a really good idea as well. And I guess my closing line for this would be around when we design workplaces for different ways of thinking, we usually end up designing workplaces that are better for everyone and much more inclusive.
It's,
That's
it's
a very
one
long answer, sorry.
No, it's good. It's one of the things that we've been talking about more from a digital workspace perspective, but as part of that whole ecosystem between the physical and the digital environment. What we've seen with the kind of rise of AI and Gen AI in particular is that lots of people have access to different platforms and all kind of sticking AI onto the different ones.
Yeah.
That can all be a bit overwhelming when you've got multiple front doors and things. So we've
Mhm.
been very kind of considerate in terms of how we're designing our employee experience spaces to be able to be, shutting down the front doors, be one consistent place to come in and, let tech do the heavy lifting in the background and make that an easier workplace for people. And, the European Accessibility Act hasn't been implemented within the UK as law, but that's what we're using our guidelines to make it much more easy for people to use digital platforms, whether they're neurodivergent or
Yeah,
whatever. That's been part of what we've been focused on for the last kind of year, 18 months or so.
brilliant.
It's a really interesting concept you were talking about with the presentations, Jackie, the sort of pre-record and the
Mhm.
I've heard about that, and it's something I was kind of thinking that like at some point I might kind of try and implement myself to see what that looks like, in practice.
Yeah.
Is there any other like emerging trends that anyone on the panel has noticed or things like that are sort of a new style of working?
Well, rather than the new style of working, I think designing a work environment that's remote, because how many of us have moved away from to Jackie's point about is the lighting right, etc. How many of us are actually remote now? And there's a huge consideration needs to go into looking after employees when they're remote. I mean, our firm are remote, and as far down as Cornwall, people work for us all the way back up to Scotland. So I think there's a huge amount of effort needs to go into off-premise as well as on-premise, because obviously a lot of what we talked about there was on-premise.
Yeah.
It is for sure something that I mean, we're all remote here. There's something that's interesting to consider. I guess it's the balance between remote and in premise, and then if people are only in premise for a certain amount of time, what does that look like whenever you want to design something that suits them?
And I think, sorry, Ryan.
Sorry, Jackie, I was just going to say, we talked about this last week actually at Lifelink. We talked about things like loneliness, and we talked about people who are, maybe if you're undiagnosed and you're sitting, at a laptop for 5 days a week in your room at the end of your kitchen table, etc. What does that mean for you as an individual, for your mental health? I mean, I'm a social person, but I'm remote, so I have to, personally, I have to make a serious effort to get out of the house every week to go meet people, because I don't know if I've got a condition, but I certainly find a struggle if I stay 5 days in the house. That's for sure. So I wonder how many organisations, actually understand how their people are feeling. They might be providing them with laptops and fidget pens and all these other things, but how are they actually feeling?
It's a good point, Nick. And one of the things we try to do is encourage find your community. Now, whether that be within your own organisation or whether that be external, because we're the same. We are a remote organisation in the main, and we can do so much support from afar and given the right tools in the work environment. But how do we get people connecting with like-minded individuals in the spaces? So, we sponsor some things in Glasgow for the tech space and try and find the community. But I encourage people who are based elsewhere, whether it be Manchester or the outskirts of London, etc., to go and find their communities and be with people. But you can give the suggestions as whether people feel comfortable to do that or not. But it's certainly one of the ways we try to close that gap a little bit.
So, I mean, we've talked about neurodiverse personnel in the office and some of the benefits that can bring and some of the ways of accommodating them. What about the recruitment process? What does the recruitment process look like to support bringing these kind of assets into your organization? Nick, with your background, your experience in recruitment, you probably have a few thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm 36 years in tech recruitment now, so I've gone from pre-internet where nobody cared about anybody to now where everybody cares. Everybody does care, but I think for me, it's about organizations living and breathing inclusivity and supportive cultures. I still see a lot of tick box exercises. I still see people that have DEI processes, but when then they have a neurodiverse situation, sometimes they struggle. Sometimes I see, going back to retention, Ross was talking about how supportive they are, but some organizations promote inclusivity, but then when somebody with a condition comes into the organization, they struggle. But things like, and we've covered some of this, Jackie's mentioned it, job descriptions, avoid jargon, be clear and concise, talk about essential skills, don't waffle. You see lots of job specs with 1,000 things on them. We'd like to have this. If you're neurodivergent, waffle doesn't help. So adapting processes, accessibility. We talked about be very clear about the process that people are coming into to help them reduce the anxiety that they have and help them build their confidence as well. And another thing that I think is really important is who's actually doing the hiring. Do the hiring managers understand even how to welcome a neurodivergent candidate into the process. Because if they haven't been trained, why would they know? Why would they understand? We need to treat people, treat people so that they feel included. And we've seen some pretty two ends of the scale, I suppose, on that. Where some organizations are absolutely fabulous at it and have trained all of the hiring managers. And I've seen interviews go very, very badly wrong because the management or the leadership, that we're hiring just didn't understand what the candidate needed to feel comfortable. And there's a whole list of other things that you could go into.
Yeah, absolutely. I was at an event earlier last year at Strathclyde University, and it was specifically around neurodiversity in the workplace. And recruitment was a bit of a part of that conversation too. Like, and what they were saying was they were encouraging you to, and this is quite radical actually, they were encouraging you to give the interview questions in advance.
Yeah.
Actually, interviews shouldn't really be a test. It's about getting the best out of the candidate and getting to know the candidate, the real candidate, the human, as much as it is about them understanding and getting to know us as a business. So I really like that. We don't do that yet, but I do think it's something that it's worth looking at even as part of a stage process. But yeah, something just for the panel and actually for members who are on the call today just to think about. How do you feel about giving those interview questions in advance?
I wish you'd given me my interview questions before I joined the board. That would have been that would have been handy. I'd have felt less anxious.
Oh dear.
Anything you want to add on recruitment, Ross?
No, I think I said earlier that we try to be clear about the role, but also clear about how it works on a day-to-day basis and making sure that people are right for the environment. I think the only person, so I took over the business as an MBO kind of just over 2 years ago now, and the only person we had left the business joined after that. And I think we made a mistake in that process around not being clear, and they were in an area where there was not really a hub around them. And they struggled with that. So it was the right move for them to leave the business. But it's probably something we could have done better in the process to make sure we avoided, maybe 6, 9 months of discomfort for the individual that it wasn't the right environment for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we're all learning.
Exactly, 100%.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think all this stuff is in an area where there's growth there's growth that's happening now, there's growth still to come. So yeah, thanks for your insights on everything so far. We have actually had a number of questions come in while we've been talking through this. We also had a couple of questions that came in when people signed up. So I'm going to deal with the questions we got when people signed up, and then I'm going to try and pick out as many of the other ones that have come in while we've been talking, and then we'll see what we can tackle in the time remaining. We've got give or take 15 minutes. So the first one that we had from one of our participants when they signed up is from Robert at Reach PLC. And Robert asked, what changes in work processes post-COVID have supported retention of neurodivergent employees? Does working from home help?
So I think, from our side, when we started the COVID lockdown process, we were very much an in-person organisation in an office across 2 different sites. And I think one of the things we say to start with is that was driven by the chief exec at the time. And I'm not making that criticism, but I think it was about making that individual feel comfortable about this is what he wanted. He wanted his people there, and the usual kind of stuff you would hear about. Well, this is about collaboration. This is about innovation and coming together. And then when we went to kind of full lockdown and everything's remote, all of a sudden I actually saw projects being delivered better, right? Because people were in an environment that suited them, particularly in our development teams. So I think one of the lessons I took from that is that I need to be comfortable being uncomfortable at times in terms of it's not about me and what I want in the business, it's about what's right for the business. And certainly, with the role of tech and the way we've seen things develop, there's more capacity to this than there was 10, 15 years ago. So very supportive of a kind of home working piece. I think what I would say is that the systems and process you can put in place are great. And I think that works when there's a happy path and people are comfortable. I think when people are feeling maybe overworked, maybe a bit of burnout or a bit of stress, or there's maybe something going on in their personal lives, that's when I think there's a bit of a struggle because I tend to find they've always had the working theory that these issues become more exaggerated when you're remote than when you're actually in the office and able to kind of maybe have easier telltale signs to spot and identify where there's issues. So maybe things take a little bit longer to kind of surface up. But that's something that we're trying to work on and support and create, as you said earlier, Jackie, the psychological safety where people
Yeah.
feel they can speak up in the environment and they can get the support. But so I think there's a great advantage to us because we can attract talent and retain talent by having that flexibility around the workplace. We do try and be flexible about the working hours, etc. as well, because ultimately, as long as you're delivering the outcomes that we need, not too worried about what time of day that happens as such. I'm supportive, but I'm conscious there's been a couple of issues where people, whether it be in that loneliness piece, Nick, or a bit of stress, I feel sometimes the mental well-being could do with being in a slightly different environment every so often. So how can we bring the teams together, not every day, not every week, but on a more regular basis to kind of have better touch points, etc. Because it's difficult when people are, and this is an interesting one to ask the guys on the panel just now, Ryan, cameras on, cameras off. That can be a huge debate in organizations when you're working
Yeah.
remotely. Do people feel under pressure? Is that the right thing for cameras on? How do we spot the signs if people aren't on camera? What are the telltale signs we can pick up on? There's stuff like that that can be big debates. But yeah, I think it's about understanding the strengths for your organization about remote working or that kind of hybrid piece, but also being really aware of what are the challenges and being sensitive to that at the same time.
Yeah, I'm the chief exec that Ross mentioned. I'm the old set in his ways guy that you know uh, grew up working in an office all his life, and then built a company in an office. So when COVID came, I have to admit, if I didn't have anxiety before COVID, I had anxiety when COVID came. That's for sure, because all of a sudden we were not in the office, and I was completely out of my comfort zone, completely. And I was lucky that I have, young people, young leaders around me who were able to guide me. And, they were able to hold my hand because I was struggling. I was definitely struggling mentally, no doubt about it. You're running a business. You have responsibility for people's lives basically and their careers and their ability to pay their bills. So for me, it was a massive pressure. But the switch to remote has been, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I wish COVID came when I started my career because we thrive. We're thriving as an organization, and of course, like Ross said, there are issues. We do have people that from time to time are struggling, but we just have to be on top of that, and we have to be communicating and talking a lot, and especially because we have people that work up and down the country. We don't see them. We see them online, but we don't see them in person, all the time. So we just have to be talking and more aware and just and actually just asking, hey, are you okay?
Yeah.
Because we all have things that go on in our personal lives. Never mind, whether you're neurodivergent or whether you're not. We all have things that go on in our lives that can tip us over the edge. So if we're not talking and not feeling in an environment that is supportive, where they can talk, where you can talk, then you are going to find that anxiety, loneliness, depression, all these things will get on top of you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think our managers and leaders in the business are key around that as well. So you talked there about, having a bit of a check-in. And I have a phrase I use often on a daily basis. I say, how are you? And then I say, and how are you really? And if you have built trust up with your colleagues, then there's more opportunity for them to say, actually, I was about to say fine, because we all say we're fine, don't we? But
Yeah.
actually, I'm actually having a bit of a tough day today or something. So how do we equip our managers and colleagues in the business to do a healthy check-in, I would call it. And I absolutely love that phrase, Ross, be comfortable with the uncomfortable. And I use it all the time. So again, how do we encourage our colleagues to be comfortable with the uncomfortable? And our workforces are changing. younger generations are coming in, and they're looking for something very different in the workplace to what perhaps Nick, Ross, and I have been used to in the past. So we're having to adapt and evolve as senior leaders and chief execs, and that's not always easy for us either. Every day's a school day.
I think there's a theme emerging here. A lot of learning that's still kind of ongoing.
I thought the theme was going to be old people, but you've changed
No.
it to you've changed it to learn, and I'm really glad about that, Ryan.
Another question we've got that's coming here from Matus at the Stepstone Group. They said, I'm especially interested in better understanding the impact of ADHD on members of tech teams. Can ADHD be a superpower? What an interesting question. Can ADHD be a superpower?
Well, I better not say too much because obviously in case he's watching, I have a colleague who tells me he's ADHD. He's never been diagnosed. I've read up on it just because I'm interested. And I would say that he wears that he wears that Superman badge on his chest every day. He's exceptional, and he's a game-changing employee. And he believes that he's ADHD, and certainly from what I've read, I would probably go along with him that he's ADHD. So for me, I've got nothing but respect for people who have those kind of conditions and are able to thrive, and being supported properly are able to thrive. So I see it as a superpower.
I think I used to do work at Insights with some of the athletes going to the Olympics through the sports psychologists and stuff. And one of the models they had was a super strength model. So 4 boxes in terms of what's a super strength and goes down to unallowable weakness. And I think there's lots of ways that ADHD can be a super strength in terms of in the development or the kind of innovation space. That kind of, they're built for curiosity essentially. There's lots of innovation and great stuff that comes through. But I think at times it's also good to understand that maybe keeping them on task for a set long period of time might not get the best out of them.
Yeah.
And again, thinking with that environment. So how do you wrap support around to get the best out of them? So really leveraging that super strength rather than just going, there's a super strength, like they're ADHD, they'll be good at that type thing and throw them into that environment. I think just being careful around how we wrap that, because we've all got super strengths as individuals, and it's how we recognise that and build the support to get the best out of people essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with what you've both said there. So yeah, I've not really got anything more to add to it, but yeah, totally agree. We do all have our superpowers. So how do we, I guess, use the superpowers within that team environment to get the best out of everyone and look after them at the same time?
I would add that while I see it as a superpower, there are other people that maybe won't see it as a superpower, because the other side of ADHD is this obsessiveness that some people have for tasks, etc. And for destroying goals, getting there before everybody else does, and sometimes they can sometimes they can be a little bit irky with other colleagues, because they are just so focused on what they've got to do and what they've got to get done. So I've seen it. While I consider it a superpower, I've seen it impact other people in a slightly different way.
Yeah, and there's a range, isn't there, in terms of where people are. So we are trying to not design for ADHD or any particular neurodiversity classification. We're trying to design for the individual as an overall piece. So we've got some people who really struggle with that content switching. So we've got to make sure there's not any squirrels around, because we've got to make sure they've got that capacity to focus on the task in hand. And there's others who need that content switching at the same time to be able to be dynamic and thrive. We try hard to make sure that people are aware of the deadlines and deliveries that we've got, but how do we make sure we're not putting that in a pressure way and allowing people flexibility around how they work, etc. So it's just around trying to do things. But yeah, ADHD is a blanket term. It's difficult to say what the super strength might be, because again, there's a diverse nature to there as well.
Is certainly it's a complicated and interesting one. I'm aware of time, so I'm just going to try and bring us along to a few other questions we saw that come in from our members here. We have one from Ian, who's a software development manager. He says, how do you provide career paths for people who want to progress down a technical path but don't want to manage other people? What do we think about this one?
I think it's a great point, and I've removed some people management from roles to allow for that tech capability to shine and concentrate on what are you really good at and what's going to provide the best value for the business at the same time. I remember a conversation with one individual who was really disappointed of getting the kind of people management side taken off them, but it was a release to them, right, in terms of they can really concentrate on where their superpowers are. And it also helps create a better experience for the people because they weren't necessarily the best that people experience. It wasn't a natural strength that they'd had. So I think it's about, from our side, we've kind of been going through a restructure just now, and we've not quite finalised that. But there'll be more focus on the technical skill set for the powers and the platform side of things, rather than just you need to be a manager of a squad or of people to be able to shine within the organisation. So we're definitely designing with that in mind at this stage, Ryan.
I think that there's another thing inside the tech industry that I've seen over many years, which is because they're very, very good at a particular piece of technology, when they start building these teams, the person that was very, very good at the start gets automatically upgraded to manager. And I've seen so many people who've been upgraded because they were great at widgets and now they're building a widget team.
Mm.
So they move the guy that was or the lady that was fantastic at it, and then they give them the role and the person accepts it, but is often not at their happiest, not at their best, don't like all the things that come with leadership, whether that be the confrontational side of it, the supportive side of the conflict. They just don't like it, and then that's when retention suffers, because people find that they're uncomfortable, and rather than saying no, I don't want to do it, they leave.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're all managers on the call. And I think, Ross, you talked about a happy path earlier. So, being a manager when it's on a happy path, it's pretty straightforward, you know, um, and everyone's happy. But as a manager, we need to manage performance, we need to manage contracts, we need to manage deadlines, and it can be really stressful. So again, I think it's definitely about coming back to people's strengths and some of those natural strengths. I think a people manager often has a natural strength around that, whereas sometimes when it's not quite within our comfort zone, it can feel more forced, and then the pressure feels heavier, and then it can also be a bit of a distraction as well when things are maybe not quite on that happy path. Takes us away from the shiny pennies, I call them, shiny pennies, or that creative side of the business that we really want to get to, the exciting stuff. People management's also exciting. I
We're
love it.
getting into speed round territory. A couple of minutes left. We've got quite a few questions coming in. I don't think we're actually going to manage to answer them all. So we'll try and kind of come back to people with some answers that we can think about offline. Just for a quick one here, we've got three people who lead and have built businesses here. Do you think neurodivergent people have more difficulties to climb the ladder up? If so, what can we do to ensure we have chances for neurodiversity to be present at all levels? That's from Laura. Anyone got a quick sort of 1-2 minute answer on this?
Did Elon Musk have problems? I mean, he's probably a perfect example of neurodivergency, and people, of course, people can thrive and grow
I think
if they're
it's about
supported.
that part being comfortable with the uncomfortable is fine. I think from my side in the tech sector, one of the things that I've been so impressed by since I've moved across is how much of a community is there to support people. So I would just encourage people to be out there and go to the various different tech events and speak to people. You'd be amazed how many people are there to help. Whether it be that you're maybe not the best person to go and sell your concept, your idea, but it's amazing, whatever. I think there's loads of people there to help. So I don't see it as a detractor at all.
It's just about our time up for this afternoon.
Like,
Thanks to the panel for joining us. Thanks to the audience for joining us as well. We hope it's been useful for you. You've found some key aspects you can take back into your own organizations. Like I said, we've actually had more questions than we've had time to answer today. So we'll look at those offline. We'll maybe put together some answers. We can send them out after the call today. Please do check us out online at lifelink.workwell.org. and you can follow us on LinkedIn. If you're interested in getting in touch with us for whatever reason, then those are ideal. You can find our inquiries on the website. You can just send us a message on LinkedIn, and we'll get back to you. And then one of our team is going to follow up with everyone who's signed up today after this webinar. They'll get in touch. We'll send a recording of the webinar, and you'll be able to sort of watch that back. So I think all that remains to be done is just thank our panelists for being here. And I just wish you all a good rest of your day.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks very much, Ryan.
Take care.
Thank you.